Good morning, draft maniacs. Welcome to another episode of Home and Away. It's your boy Tyler Rucker hosting. The No Ceilings crew is being a little dangerous, allowing me to have full control of an open mic, but I'm joined by someone special, the one and only Corey Tulaba. We're going to talk some draft today. Corey, how are you doing?
You already know who it is. It's your boy. I'm actually so happy to be on this show with you. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because there was some slander thrown out on this podcast yesterday to start off. And I feel blessed as a resident New York Football Giant fan to just say you play to win the games.
Yes.
The ultimate win in football are Super Bowl championships, Rucker. You're a Vikings fan. What would you do for one?
I probably couldn't say it on the air without us getting banned, but I don't know what a Super Bowl is because I've never won one. My team has never won one. So for everyone that's catching up, apparently there was some slander of Mr. Eli Manning as a
just catching strays. Strays. And look, you win one Super Bowl, you get hot, you get a little lucky. That's happened historically.
Yes.
Okay, through the history of football. But there are only 5 people who have won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Eli Manning's one of them. Okay? And look, you could sit and you could hate on him all you want, but the guy won 2. He brought us 2. Name a Super Bowl champion that didn't have a good defense, that didn't have a good offensive line. I think you'd be probably hard-pressed to find it. Football is a team sport. Eli Manning took us to where we needed to go. I will accept no slander by Detroit Lions fans. That's all I'll say.
Shout out Mr. Metcalf. Apparently they got a little aggressive on it. I can't wait to go back and listen. But yeah, anytime Eli Manning gets brought up, of course, we're gonna rattle the cages a little bit with Mr. Tulaba. So I'm glad that you put your foot down, stuck your guns, and I have to back up you a little bit because I know Eli doesn't have the best regular season performance, but hey, when the lights are the brightest, when it's the most important, when everyone's a little nervous, Mr. Eli Manning rose to the occasion and got two rings.
Iron Man.
Yeah.
Took down the Patriots empire. Won
Everybody
in Lambeau.
loves that about
Come
him.
on.
We all know that.
Come on. All right. That's it. Let's talk about some basketball.
We're okay. There we go. See, we get a little bit of a vent to, rattle the cages, loosen up a little bit because we do talk about basketball all year round. But it's draft season, and why I wanted to have you on this episode. I know we usually have some random guests, some outsiders, but Corey, me and you haven't really been able to talk in depth about this draft class because we've been grinding with No Ceilings, grinding on projects, online, away from off the line, if you want to put it that way. Shout out Vince Vaughn. But we haven't had time. I've been talking too much to Metcalf. I've been talking too much to the other guys, and I wanted to get your thoughts.
Off the line is such an obscure Vince Vaughn reference from Intern to the Intern. That is such an obscure reference that so few people picked up on, but it's an underrated film.
I'm telling you guys, it's going to get a little crazy. I don't know what I'm going to do today on this pod. you guys might be like, hey, Rucker can't host Home and Away ever again, but on the line, we're going to put this episode, and I want to get your draft thoughts. We're going to have this be a little bit of a draft vent because me and you haven't, opened up the doors, let all of our feelings out about how we're feeling about this class. You've been hitting the road scouting. I've been hitting the road scouting, and I feel like we're finally getting to the point where it's like, okay, we're getting a good vibe for some of these top names, even some of these lower names that are rising up boards. And I'm going to let you start it out, Mr. Tulaba. Like, what are you feeling about this draft class so far? Are you intrigued? Is it living up to your expectations? Are you thinking it's a little early with some of these guys like, Dariq Whitehead, Dereck Lively kind of coming back from injuries? Nick Smith just made his debut last week for Arkansas. Where are you really at right now with this class?
All right. So my overall feelings for this class is obviously, I think the top 2 guys have more than lived up to expectations. So
I would agree. Yes.
When you're talking about your strength of a draft class and you have your, quote unquote generational guys who are actually living up to that right away. 2 thumbs up from me.
Yes.
I think things get murky after that, in that I still think that 3rd spot is up for grabs. I don't think anybody has just, taken it from anybody else. I think the lottery talent in this draft has proven to be really strong. I think that they've come out, mostly lived up to expectations. I think when we start the year, we forget that there is going to be a transition for freshmen to catching up to the speed of the game, playing with new teammates, learning a new offense, playing in a new defense where they actually have to defend, or there might be some consequences. You don't defend in college, you might ride the Pied Pony. So with all that said, I think the 1 through 14 guys in that range, maybe 15, 16, I think they've all pretty much lived up to their preseason hype, which I think for most drafts, at this point last year, guys like Caleb Houston and a number of guys that we had in the top 10 coming into the year had already kind of been like, yeah, I don't know about this guy, right? So I think we're on the right path. However, I'm a little nervous after we get out of that like 14, 15, 16, 17 range for the depth of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I think us, the draft sickos, we're so in this thing that we kind of have the background on these players, and we're like, oh, they showed these flashes in this tournament or whatever. But I don't know how many of those guys have showed a lot kind of, after. And I think what that in part has done, and where I know you and I are always a fan of these guys, I think some of these older guys who have, had really solid outings have a real chance to move up and stick in those spots. And maybe it's just, you go, well, they're experienced, they should be playing well. But I also think that these guys have made real jumps. And with the question marks of some of the other guys in this class, I think some of the older guys like a Chris Murray, like a Marcus Sasser, have an opportunity to kind of leapfrog them and stay there. So I'm still in wait and see mode. We haven't really gotten to conference play. But I think that the draft class ultimately there's a lot to play out, a lot of reason to be excited, but also a lot of reasons to kind of pump the brakes and realize, there's only going to be a few impact guys. So let's try to identify which of those guys actually are going to be the impact guys.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think you're spot on with I'm even looking at my board, and right after I get to, outside the lottery, you do start getting some question marks. You start getting some, okay, well, is there a lot of guys in this class that we're excited about what they could become? And like I always say, chasing the idea of what this player could be instead of what they are right now. And obviously these guys aren't finished products, but I feel like even with myself right now, I'm trying to put guys up in a range where I'm like, well, they're going to hit their stride eventually this year. They're going to, take that next step. It's just a little bit of a slow start, but then you keep looking at some guys, and the upperclassmen really do have a shot in this class to make some noise. I mean, as you just hinted, Chris Murray for Iowa, Keegan's brother, has been off to an outstanding start this year. He's looked great. Jalen Wilson of Kansas has been good. Marcus Sasser has been good. I think we want to see kind of his efficiency maybe take a little bit of a turn, but there's a lot of really intriguing upperclassmen. Colby Jones, I wrote about at No Ceilings last week. There's some intriguing guys, but there's also some.
I just saw Trayce.
There you go.
And here's the thing, like Trayce is off to a good start. I saw him at Rutgers, and for those who haven't been at the Rack or Jersey Mike's Arena, I think it's probably one of the 5 toughest environments in college basketball.
Yes.
That team is 10-3 over the last few years against ranked opponents. They took down the number 1 team in the country at home last year. It's truly, if you have, there's not many reasons to go to New Jersey, but if you do find yourself in that awful state, you should definitely find your way to a Rutgers game, because I think it's probably one of the best environments to evaluate prospects. Because it is just, one thing goes wrong and that place is on their feet, loud as all hell. And it's really fun seeing how these draft prospects handle that environment. You can't use that as like, oh, this guy maybe didn't have his best game in that environment, but I think just seeing the poise and how they handle it. Trayce Jackson-Davis, he really impressed me. And I think that he ultimately is going to be a guy who might have, even though he's a senior, like I could see him landing at the end of the first round, because even though I think that he plays in an antiquated offense in college, me watching him, I'm like, oh, but instead of just throwing him on the block every single time, what if they ran him off like handoffs and horn sets and, let him initiate more of the break and grab and go and, opened up that playmaking a little bit more. I obviously I want to see the shot come along. I don't think he's going to be shooting a ton of threes. He's always been a middling free throw shooter, but there's just a lot to like from a value perspective for a guy who knows how to play the game. I was a little upset that Jalen Hood-Schifino had to miss that game at Rutgers. That was the real reason I made my way to Jersey. But a guy like Jackson-Davis impressed me. So I think the upperclassmen are going to have moments, throughout this season, and really, kind of take advantage of those idea guys that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm heading this weekend actually to Vegas to go watch Indiana's playing Arizona, and I've been a big believer of TJD. I think he has a spot in the next level. I think is this the idea, Corey, in which evaluators and fans were overthinking with just this guy? Is like, we want him, like everyone's like, hey, if he just had an outside shot, but it's like, well, even if he doesn't have an outside shot, a team might be like, hey, we have a great role for this guy where he comes in, does damage around the basket. He's, seventh guy in our rotation, eighth guy early on in his career. But those are the upperclassmen I feel like we all overthink. And I'm even saying NBA front offices, and I'm not saying I have a crystal ball, but it's like, this is the singles. This is the doubles when you're trying to swing for the fences and swing for potential. We just saw Andrew Nembhard last night.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy against the Warriors. And everyone's like, wow, gosh, he looks unbelievable for value at 31. And it's like, well, he could always play. He just wasn't putting up 30 a game because he understood his role. Right. He was a damn good basketball player for his team.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think what people don't realize about wanting to hit singles or a double is that sometimes those singles bat a runner in. It's not just getting on base. Sometimes you're actually driving a run in, right?
Yes.
And I think that the Memphis Grizzlies are the perfect example of a team that has not really cared about age. They got their superstar. They got their, maybe their number 2 guy in Jaren, but then they went and got a Desmond Bane. They got Brandon Clark. They took LaRavia and Roddy, and they're taking all these guys that know how to play. And I think sometimes we forget that these upperclassmen, even though they might be a little older, it doesn't mean they're done developing.
Yes.
Look, Desmond Bane had a ton of fans on draft Twitter, right? Draft Twitter definitely got that one right. But I think even the people that were highest on Desmond Bane probably didn't foresee him being one of the best shooting guards in the league this early in his career, right? So I think when you put these guys in the right system, around the right teammates, at the right time, even guys who are a little bit older have a chance to, really, really outperform their draft stock. And we look back and go, oh my God, why did this guy drop so far? And it's like, but we don't learn because we still want to take the shot on the guy who is just all tools, no feel, no, like maybe shows flashes here and there. And really the chances of hitting that home run are slim to none, and you're more likely to strike out. So, I mean, look, I'm not saying to fully go all in on upperclassmen. It's just that there's real value to be had. And I think Nembhard is the perfect example of that in this last draft class, because that kid's come in mature, playing in a system where, people share the ball and they're shooters and there's athleticism and there's spacing and good coaching. And he just found himself in the right role. He might have gone to another team and he could be riding, in the G League right now, but he found the right spot. And we're going to look back and probably be like, this guy, there's no way he should have went, in the second round. So,
right.
I think that's something that we definitely have to consider as evaluators, and look at what are the common denominators between these older upperclassmen that actually do thrive, because that's a white space in this draft scene that we're in, that, we don't, and I think we do a good job at No Ceilings of always kind of pumping the upperclassmen when we have the time to. So, but I think there's some real value in these guys that people always overlook every year.
Completely agree. Let's get back to the meat and potatoes. So here's what I'm going to let you do. You get to pick a guy, anyone you want to talk about, that me and you haven't gone into detail about, anyone you're just vibing on. It could be a potential top 5 pick. It could be a guy later in the first round, but the world is your oyster. You get to pick Mr. Tulaba because you're the guest. Hit me with it. Who are you vibing on lately?
All right. I mean, let's just do it, because I feel like we've been in since the summer. Let's talk about Ausar Thompson.
Let's do it. So you've got to go, for everyone listening that hasn't followed up, let me just throw this in there. Sorry, Corey, to cut you off, but you went to the Overtime Elite Pro Day. You saw them in person. I think you even wrote about them. You've had a lot of analysis about it. You came on our No Ceilings NBA Draft Show podcast, and then I just went and saw them play Hillcrest up here in Arizona. So for everyone listening, we've had some vibes. Me and Corey have also been trying to work on a piece that will be released in the future. But I feel like me and you have had some Ausar thoughts before the season started. And then we finally shared them together. And I was like, thank you, Corey. This is why I love you, because we always think alike. So what are you vibing about Ausar? What's your thoughts lately?
So I'm also going to see Ausar today or tonight in Brooklyn. Hopefully I get there in time. It's going to be a mad dash, and but hopefully I don't think I'll hit too much traffic. So fingers crossed. Pray for me.
Fingers crossed.
I feel like, everybody's been so hot on Amen because he's such a fantastic playmaker that we're kind of sleeping on Ausar, when I think if we just sit and look at what are the strides that each guy made from last year to this year, I really think like Ausar is kind of, and look, I think in the last ESPN mock, Ausar was, 5th. So let's not try to, make this conversation about Ausar being,
right,
to out of the lottery or something. But I think that like Ausar should be talked about as a top 5 talent in this draft, way more than he is. And I realize these Overtime Elite guys, it's a weird thing because they're on Amazon Prime. Not everybody has Amazon Prime. Not everyone's going out of their way to watch Amazon Prime all the time. It's just they're not as available as some of the other guys. Their highlights aren't going to be on Sports Center, right? It's just something out of sight, out of mind. But when I saw Ausar at the pro day, and he was coming off an injury, so he wasn't looking like super bouncy or anything, but he still had moments athletically where I was like, whoa, the fluidity is really impressive in person. He looks like he glides around the floor. But one of the things I was hyper focused on with these guys is like not even makes and misses, but what does your form look like this year compared to last year? And do I think that could be sustainable in a real way in an NBA offense? And I think the reason that you and I have been so in on Ausar is because, one, like that form is really rebuilt, and it's not perfect by any means. There are some inconsistencies, but he's shooting it almost 40% this year. I think it's listed at 42.9% on the website, but I did the math and they're a little off, but it's almost 40%. And just the way it visually looked to me, I was like, that's a fluid jumper. Like that, there's nothing I can really point to that go broken. Like with Amen, I can point to some things and I'm like, that's kind of broken. Like I know that they're working with him, but an NBA team might be like, all that work you just did, well, we want you to start over again. I don't think that's Ausar. I think an NBA team would be like, okay, that's a really good base for us to work with. And obviously the work he's doing has really benefited him because he's shooting it well. He's scoring well. He's defending well. And obviously, like we talk about how hard the OT is to evaluate because these are kids who are on the older side of the freshman class and they're playing against guys like Bryson Tiller who are sophomores in high school some nights. They're playing these, Hillcrest and all that. So they're a lot of times playing down in competition, but obviously just the eye test says their athletic tools, their skills are so much higher that you could still kind of give them a proper evaluation, even though it may be hard. And they have freedom, which I like. I always mention like the OTE for these guys. Like LaMelo Ball had this crazy freedom in Australia, and at times it was an absolute nightmare. He was taking shots that, like, if he was in a college system, there's very few coaches, I think, that would have allowed him to play that way. But ultimately, that freedom allowed him to learn what he can and can't do, and what is a good shot, what maybe isn't, and he's reined it in a little bit in the NBA and shot it much better. But I just think there's something special about Ausar, and I think the role that he has, it's just a little bit more translatable than Amen. And I think there's something to that, because I think if Amen lands in the right system, he's the primary ball handler. He's got a bunch of shooters around him. The dude is going to be impossible to keep out of the paint. And even if he doesn't, knock down shots at a high clip, he'll still bring value as a guy who pressures the rim and finds his teammates. But I also think there's a world where he goes to a team with a couple other ball handlers, teams that have been in the lottery before and have a bunch of guys who already kind of play that role. He might struggle to find his footing early on, because he's going to be like, how do I adjust now that the ball isn't always in my hands? Whereas Ausar has already made that adjustment. He's used to not playing with the ball all the time, but he also has shown that, like, he can make really impressive reads too as a passer. Like, he's kind of got both. Maybe it's not as high level as Amen, and maybe part of that's just reps, but I think that he just has a clearer spot where he could slide in and contribute as a role player, almost like AJ Griffin right now. He's slid in so seamlessly, and obviously Ausar is not the shooter that AJ is, right?
Right.
But he's managed to find a role by just being an off-ball guy, and I would bet almost anything that as the years progress, AJ will start getting more on-ball reps in that offense and creation reps. But right away, he was just like, all right, I know what I could do to fit into this offense. I'm going to catch and shoot. I'm going to run off movement, and I'm going to get out and transit. I'm just going to get easy points. I think Ausar is a guy who can find easy points for himself at the next level.
I'm right there with you. I love how you put all of that, because I watched the pro day via YouTube. Shout out Overtime Elite, but obviously watching it on TV and watching it in person is two different worlds. So that's why I went to go see them, especially after talking to you and hearing your thoughts. I went into that game that I watched, and I was a little hesitant on Amen just because I wanted to. Everyone was hyping him like, oh, this is the third pick. This is the third pick. And as I've always said, I want to get my own thoughts about someone before I start buying into everybody's outside noise. But I was very intrigued with Ausar. And I left there, and I think I even texted you, and I said, I believe Amen will get drafted first, like but between the two of them. But I said, if I was in a front office, I would be banging the table for Ausar. And what I meant by that is Amen I was pleased. I was like, okay, this dude's a monster.
He's very good.
He's very good. I understand why everyone thinks he's third. He's legit. I was very, very like, okay, I'm in. I'm excited. But I felt it was very easy for him when he had the ball in his hand. When he didn't have the ball in his hand, I felt myself catching him a couple times being like, what are you doing? You're watching. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you impacting now? Like, you got to get moving. With Ausar, it felt all smooth. Like, everything felt smooth. Even if he didn't have the ball in his hands, I always felt like he understood where to go, where to be, where to find lapses in the defense, where to cut backdoor, or he would get a rebound in transition, know where the ball is supposed to go right away. It just felt he was more ready for any role to transition to at the next level. And that's why, like, I feel like some people have, draft fans have like kind of jumped on us of like, you guys just don't like the Thompson twins. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. I just want them both to go to the right fit. And I think Amen, if he goes to a team that has a lot of ball handlers, like say he went to Orlando right now or Houston. Yeah, that on paper, that sounds really exciting. But then all of a sudden, that's a lot of guys that need the ball in their hands that I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, who is going to thrive in that? And Amen might be able to thrive anywhere. But I'm just thinking that Ausar could have that more natural transition because he knows he's a little bit more polished off the ball. Like I felt good about his shot. In warmups, Ausar's shot I felt was robotic, and then the game started and it was like sped up 10 times. And I was like, okay, so you're working on it with a serious mindset before the game, like each rep. And then the game started, and I think his first touch, it was a catch and shoot three, and it was lightning quick, and it was nothing but net. And I was like, okay, I'm on the edge of my seat now. Let's buckle up. So I like them both a lot, but I'm right there with you. It's just, I think the fit and the role is going to be interesting. And it would not shock me if they're both top 5 picks when all things are said and done.
Not at all, especially because they're going to get in workouts. And
Yes.
Look, NBA teams are very familiar.
Yes.
With these guys. They're very familiar, right? At the pro day, I think there were 25 teams there. There was a pro day yesterday in Manhattan for the City Reapers. So NBA at the NBA Player Association.
Players Association.
Right? These guys are not going to be strangers to the draft world, but you're going to get in workouts, and it's not just going to be, we had some scouts at the pro day. It's going to be the general managers and the president of basketball operation and the coach. And it's going to be a lot more guys who are going to be heavily involved in the decision making who are watching them in these workouts. And they're going to be like, wow, like these kids, top tier athletes. Like, I think in an open gym, I'm still a little more weary about Amen, but the draft is far away. His shot can improve tremendously since, from now until then. Right now, he's shooting 15%. He needs drastic improvements. When I saw him, he was struggling to hit open shots and just shooting around. I think Ausar, he's a guy who could be like, oh, did you know Ausar hit 15 to 23s in the workout? Like, and I think that Ausar, Amen doesn't really have anywhere to go. 1 and 2 are settled. Amen is either going to be the 3rd pick or he'll drop a little bit. I don't think he'll drop too much. I think if his play right now hasn't dropped him down boards, I don't think his play is going to, even if he stagnates the rest of the year, right? But I think Ausar is a guy who can get into a workout and be like, oh, wow, this guy, I know everyone's talking about Amen, but like you said, someone's going to be like, but what about his brother, right? Like maybe he's the guy. So I think when the decision makers see these guys up close, we're really going to hear the names heat up in a real way. We're going to see guys post more videos. People are going to fans, their teams are going to be out of the playoff picture. They're going to be invested in the draft, and these guys, their names will really start to heat up outside of just the sickos. But I do think Ausar's got a chance to be right there with them. Like you said, 2 top 5 picks. It wouldn't shock me if they ended up going 3 and 4. Maybe that's not what I would personally do, but it's totally possible that it's Vic, Scoot, Amen, Ausar in some order.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's talk pivot a little bit, because you had a certain player you were very, very high on coming into the year, and I'm going to give you your praise because you were more confident to go out on a limb and have him extremely high. And he's been buzzing lately. Brandon Miller, Alabama. What have your takeaways been? Have you been as impressed as you're expecting? Or is the crowd that's pumping the 2-point percentage correct? Or do you think that's a little overreaction? Or what would you like to see from him moving forward? Because he's been fantastic, and you were high on that since you watched him in high school. You're like, hey, this kid going to Bama has got a real shot to be something. So, you're a genius, and all of us are below you. Okay.
Everyone knows that about me. I've been obviously thrilled because Brandon Miller has made me look pretty smart early on. I think for me, it was just like, hey, can we not overthink this? Like, he's 6'9", he can handle the ball, he could pass, and I think he could shoot. And in high school, maybe the 3-point percentage, which similar, I know he's getting Jabari comps. I don't think that's a very clean comp. As somebody who I think this year has tried and is in the process of taking hey, NBA draft comps are good, but let's make the right ones. And,
yes.
Let's not just take the narrative of a guy like Jabari who wasn't really known as a shooter and then became the shooter of last draft. I don't think Brandon Miller is going to be the 3-point shooter throughout the course of the year that Jabari was, but I also think his in-between game is more polished, and I think his finishing is going to level out because, he is big. He is fluid. And I think he's going to, find more ways to get himself easy points in the paint. Maybe those half court numbers aren't going to be where they are, but I think people are, in that regard, people are really worried he's not this crazy athlete. And neither was Jabari. I think he's he's way more fluid than Jabari is as a mover. But I also think that I really think when you're that size, athleticism is like kind of overrated. Yeah, I really think that this league has proven time and again that, like, obviously, if you're a plus athlete along with skill and feel, that is what could take you into like all NBA, all-star territory. But I just think when you're that big, you don't have to be the craziest athlete in the world because, it's as long as you understand the game and you understand where you're supposed to be on the floor and where your teammates are, like, you're going to find ways to get to your spots. And he's a spots guy. Like in high school, he lived in the mid-range, right? He was a guy that was, taking a couple of dribbles, making a quick move, hitting a step back. And, I would like to see a little bit more of that throughout the college season, but we might not. But I think that's something that will ultimately return. That mid-range scoring too was what led me to believe he was going to be a good three-point shooter. Cause I think it's easier to project somebody inside out when you have like that mid-range shooting ability to stretch it out. Cause now you're just getting used to the distance. You don't have to do anything to necessarily adjust your form or anything. Whereas, if you're a three-point shooter, I think it's harder to be like, all right, let me find the rhythm to get to the mid-range spots now and add that. So I don't know. I just think that it was like people kind of overthought him. And you look at lists and you're like, all right, he's ranked 19th or 20th in this draft. I'm going to keep him in that range when, there's like a bunch of like bigs or smaller guards maybe who are ranked higher. And you're just like, all right, but that's not where the NBA game is headed towards. People thought he was the 19th rated college prospect, but, translating to the NBA versus what college coaches are looking for are two different things. Small guards can dominate in college. It's something that we get angry about a lot of the times where we're watching for draft prospects and it's like, oh my God, like this point guard is taking another like Jeremy Roach again. Like, what are we doing? Like, just pass. Let's get the ball to one of these draft prospects so we could evaluate him. And so I think Brandon Miller was just an overthink guy. It's just like he looks the part. He played the part. And I think defensively, I was so high on him because if you watched him in so many different contexts pre-college, he was playing big man. He was guarding out on the perimeter. And it was just like that versatility. Like NBA teams want that. They want switchable guys. And so I don't know. I think sometimes we need to realize like, all right, maybe not the gaudiest stats on some of these guys. Again, why I was so high on Jarris. Like, I think he's an NBA body. He's an NBA versatility skill set. He's not going to be a guy that averages much more than 10 points per game in college because, teams aren't going to run things through him. This Houston team's not going to run things through him. They have two incredible guards. But in the NBA, an NBA team might. So we have to start looking at like these prospects like, okay, this is what they could do in college, but when they get to a different game, can they still do that? Do they have the skill set? And I think Brandon Miller is a guy who's still going to have the skill set in the NBA that it'll translate.
Yeah, I love how you put that because there is a lot of guys that people are going to get to a point where they're looking at mock drafts and big boards and they're like, why is this guy projected ahead? He's not even averaging this points per game. And Nick Smith Jr. should be ahead of Jarris Walker or whatever it was. And it's like, we have to project ahead too. You're not drafting just the college guy. You're drafting the guy that you think he's going to turn into a 3-year, 5-year down the road weapon at the next level. And the Brandon Miller thing's been fascinating because, that Bama team came in, they're always tough, but then he was buzzing like crazy coming into the year, like through preseason. It was all you heard was Brandon Miller looks fantastic. Every one of his teammates were talking about defending him. They're like, man, he's a monster. I mean, he's 6'9", 200 listed at that. He looks lengthy as heck. He's averaging 19 and 9 as a wing, but he's just been battling inside. And I think a lot of people are fascinating with like, well, his 2-point percentage is terrible. Like, okay, fine. He's shooting 40% from the field, 34% from 2, 46% from 3. I'm not too worried about that right now. We're 8 games in the year. We got a long way to go. Now, if it gets down
small
to that
sample
point,
size.
Exactly. Small sample size. He's also just battling in the paint. And I love to see that from if you want to call it a skinny wing, because his body's filling out. And I would counter that with like, hey, I love the fact that he's almost averaging 19 and 10 as a potential small forward at the next level. It's unbelievable for a freshman. We don't see guys that just have a desire to go live in the paint and hit the boards. So I've loved everything I've seen from him. Now, I think he's also at that point where he's the guy. He's getting the attention of being the guy on the other team. Teams are when you start the season out hot, now opposing teams have film on you. And then they're going to work to try to stop you and prevent you. So you're getting everybody's kitchen sink thrown at you. And you have to learn how to adjust to that. Learn to adjust to double teams and constant pressure and getting some of the best defenders in the country on you. And I think we've seen that. But, I mean, especially the North Carolina game, he struggled. But, right after the game, Hubert Davis is like, hey, he's an absolute pro. That guy is a legit. And it's like, yeah, how many coaches have said that after a just terrible shooting performance? It just shows how much talent he has.
Yeah, and even in that Carolina game, right? Like I don't remember if it was the end of the second half or one of the overtimes. Like he had a stretch where he had 5 points really quickly, and it's like he was struggling the whole game, but he still kept his confidence that it's like, all right, like I got to bring us home too. And when he had the opportunity, when he had the ball in his hands, like made big shots, hits, like took the ball to the hole, got to the free throw line. So I think there's, even when you look at the overall, like you can't box score watch. You still have to look for little things and be like, oh, I like that he, knew the moment and he was still confident. Like, all right, if I'm going to be one of the guys, I still have to be one of the guys. It doesn't matter. I'm not afraid to go 2 for 20. I'm okay. Like if I go 4 for 20, great. But if I might go 2 for 20 if I take these shots and miss. That's fine. I got it. I'm trying to win. I'm not worried about my percentages. I think my play on the court is going to speak for itself. I don't need to be a guy who has 50, 40, 90. I want to win this game. I'm competitive. I think that matters too. So I think Brandon Miller is, like you said, he's a guy that is he's perfectly suited for the NBA. And when we look at some of these guys, like, that's how we have to evaluate it. We have to look at it through that lens. It's the reason that everyone was shocked that Scotty Barnes went ahead of Jalen Suggs, even though Jalen Suggs had a significantly better college resume, right? It's sometimes these guys are looking at NBA tools. And when you have like the mesh of a guy like Brandon Miller, who has production along with NBA tools, that's when you start getting some ideas. So I think he's going to continue to have a big year. Maybe he ends up at 16 and a half, 17 points per game. Maybe he's not a 20, point per game scorer. It's really hard in college to score 20 points per game,
Yes,
and it's almost unheard of for a freshman to do it. So when they get into consistent conference play, he'll start seeing the film. When teams play each other a second time, they're going to be like, all right, this is what we did the first time. Now we know some of their plays. We could take away certain things. All right, we realize, all right, he took 2 dribbles to the left and he pulled up a couple of times. So now we're going to push him right. How is he going to handle that? But that's part of the evaluation process because you could see how these guys respond to the adjustments. But I think he's talented enough that he's going to do it. And I think his finishing is going to get better throughout the year.
Completely agree with you. It won't shock me if he's even going to go on a little stretch here of putting up some scary numbers, because I think there's only a matter of time before everything's coming together. The outside shot, finishing around the basket. And I do like how you said that. When you're 6'8", 6'9", we don't need you to be Vince Carter with the athleticism. We need you to be able to get your shot off of, bigger opponents. And, obviously this isn't the greatest comparison because he's a unicorn when it comes to this area, but like Luka isn't the greatest athlete, but Luka knows where to get to his spots, and Luka knows how to read defenders and get his shot off and be 6'8". And, I'm not comparing them, so everyone calm down. But I'm just saying that idea of like, you can't be dominant unless you have great athleticism. It's like Luka Doncic would like something to say about that. He's pretty damn good, and we're not putting him in a dunk contest anytime soon.
Well, even going away from Luka and that's why all the people who had seen Luka are banging the table. Like, this guy's a generational prospect. Like, he is a generational prospect. Like, what are we doing here?
Yes.
Right. Like, the people who really watched him, not to mention he held his own in, against like Russell Westbrook on an island, as like a 16-year-old, but
it's pretty good.
Whatever.
Pretty good.
But, even like in the Tatum draft, right? Like, Josh Jackson versus Tatum. It was like, Josh Jackson's a way better athlete. He's going to be this creator. He's going to be a Paul George type of guy. And people were like, I don't know about Tatum. Tatum's kind of like he's a good athlete, but he's not anything special. Shoots a lot of tough shots. What's that going to be in the NBA? And it was like so clear if you watch both of them, like that the athleticism difference is not going to be the thing that makes the difference, because the skill level was just so much more apparent. And like, obviously, the Celtics made that decision. They made the right move there. But I think that even like Tatum, like there were question marks for a guy like him about the kind of shots he was taking and what his efficiency was going to look like. And that breeds the larger point that these guys are draft prospects, and like nobody can see the end result, but there are definitely flashes that let you know what the end result might be. And it's just about actually weighing the expectations. And if that end result is, what the likely outcome could be. And if there are a range of outcomes, like Josh Jackson, maybe in another world, he goes to a good situation with a good support staff around him. He has his things together and he puts it together, right? Like maybe that, but the likelihood of that was obviously a lot less than what, people wanted to give him credit for. So I think we have to look at and evaluate and be like, all right, how much more valuable is skill level when you also have than like just being the best athlete on the floor when you have a skill set to back it up. And I think that's why some people are starting to put Brandon Miller ahead of the Thompson twins, who have that athleticism but have some questionable skills. Even we just broke those down. Ultimately, I don't, we'll see what happens on draft night, and Brandon Miller's got to keep this level of play up because he's actually going to be in the spotlight playing on ESPN. And it'll be much more available to people, but it's definitely a worthwhile debate. Obviously, I think it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think you can make any just definitive statements about which one is better than the other, but it matters. If Scoot was just a great athlete and not as skilled as he is, he wouldn't be the number 2 pick, right? Maybe he would be, but he wouldn't be viewed as this potential, all-NBA guard. So you have to have the skill to maximize the athleticism.
Love this out of you, Corey. Okay. We're pivoting one more time. Pivot. Shout out friends. I'm going to put you on the spot here. You get to talk about anyone you want. You either get to talk about who's impressing you or who are you watching closely, AKA you're not there yet. You can't come around them, or you're starting to get concerned. We could do a little hot or cold right now if you want to call it that way. But, I'm just trying to pick the mind of Corey Tulaba. So where are we at right now when it comes to the draft process? What name's getting you excited? What name are you kind of being like, oh boy, I don't feel good because I'm going to have to watch 5 hours of your film to get an opinion?
All right, let's do a little what I'll coin as drop coverage.
See, this is why I love you. Everybody knows this.
We love themes here.
Yes.
I want to talk about the Duke guys a little bit.
Oh boy. Well,
I'm right.
Just added an hour.
And Filipowski is a guy I'm writing about, which will be out on Wednesday. So
I'd love to talk about him, but if you want to save those thoughts for the on the line,
we could absolutely talk about him a little bit. But the guys that I'm actually more interested in the thoughts are the guys who maybe you're dropping a little bit. It's Dariq and Lively. I think that. Lively, I think they're both predictable outcomes of what happened. Dariq coming off of this injury, it's no surprise that he's kind of starting slow. Lively also came off an injury, not playing with a very, an elite level playmaker. There is no Taron Armstrong on that team that's going to be able to find him in all sorts of directions. Maybe Proctor gets there by the end of the year, I guess. Maybe he shows flashes, but I have some question marks about some of his decision making as well. But I don't think we should panic because these guys are struggling to come out of the gates. But what I wonder is, were we kind of not looking for certain things? And we saw Dariq hit a lot of tough shots, but I had a lot of question marks about Dariq coming into the year because he really loved settling for those tough shots. He really, really, really loved it. And a lot of the guards did. Nick Smith liked taking tough shots. Keontae liked taking tough shots. But Dariq, I felt like especially, maybe it was because he's a little bigger, that he felt like he could just get it over these guys. And when he had it going, he would knock them down. But sometimes I'd be like, that's just awful process and awful result. And I do have my concerns with Dariq, even when he gets fully healthy. Is he a guy that, because of his size in high school, he was able to maybe make his way to the hoop a little bit more freely, and you saw maybe him mix it up a little bit, versus now where the athleticism might be a little bit more even? Is he just going to be a guy who he's got to hit tough shots to keep it going, or does he have those other parts to his game? I don't know. I'm not panicking on him. I haven't dropped him tremendously down my board, but he's certainly kind of come out and I've been like, all right, I understand you want to work your way into who you are. But sometimes I think, all right, let's pump the brakes a little bit, because you still have to think the game, and you can't take these crazy shots, even when you're going to get limited minutes. I don't know. Where are you at with Dariq right now?
It's tough because I completely agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like, he was one of those names coming into the year I was so excited about, because I thought if he took the next step forward, like, there was just a monster on both sides of the floor. But there was a lot of caution when it comes to, like, okay, he's dominating some plays in high school, and this is what we always talk about, like, hey, the high school film can be a complete tease, because you look and you're like, hey, this guy's dominating, he's blowing by everyone. It's like, yeah, he's also blowing by guys that, no offense, but they're probably not going to play D1 basketball. Like, they're just, we talk about it with the big guys. We talked about it with Jalen Duren last year, of, like, jokingly, like, okay, we don't need to watch his high school film too much because he's the Incredible Hulk out there compared to who he's playing against, and he dunks everything in the world. And now lower body injuries terrify me, especially for a college kid coming into the year, because if you got a foot injury, if you got an ankle injury, knee injury, you're not working. You're not running every day to keep yourself in game shape, because you got to stay off it. You got to be smart about it. So I think Duke was like, hey, we can't have him on this injury. We got to just wait for it to heal, and then he'll catch up and get in game shape. Now, that's what I'm dreaming, is they're like, hey, middle of the year, he'll be having his game reps back and he'll get himself in game shape, and then we can unleash it. Because right now I'm like, oh boy, where are we heading with this? And it's going to be interesting. I feel like I feel like me and Metcalf talked about it, and I was like, what's the number of games before you start going from, DEFCON 4 to DEFCON 2 when it comes to, okay, do we need to start moving them down seriously? And I feel like that 15, 16 point where it's like, okay, he's had, if you want to say 10 or plus games, and if we still are at the same minute uptick, or they're not extending his minutes, then we got to get a little bit concerned. But I'm like you, the tough shot making at high school is really interesting. And I like how you put that, because, like, Jaden Hardy, really tough shot maker at high school. Me and you were just, like, in awe of some of the shots he was hitting on film, and he could still do that. And now I think even last night they were blowing out Phoenix, and he came in and was going crazy right away. He's been dominating in the G League this year. I think it's only a matter of time before he, sends a message to the rest of the league with the Mavericks. But, like, that's a talent. That is a gift. That is an ability when you can hit shots no matter what. But some guys, it's like, okay, if that tough shots all of a sudden get way more difficult with better defenders, I feel like you can really struggle to make an impact. So I don't know. I'm in a weird spot with Dariq. I've moved him down a little bit, but I'm still in that, like, okay, I really believe in this. I just think you have to get in game shape to kind of thrive at your designated role, because I loved him as a defender. I loved him as a defensive prospect. And I think you pointed it out to me. You were like, hey, Dariq, Dariq looks like he needs to get back in game shape. And I was like, yeah, that's a tough one to have to say when you're trying to, catch up after missing a couple of games.
Yeah, I think the difference in like Hardy's drop versus Dariq is that Dariq does have the size and physicality to ultimately, at least you could kind of project him to be a two-way guy, and he's not going to be taken advantage of. Where people with Jaden, it was like, all right, if he's not hitting shots, I don't know if he could be on the floor because teams might pick on him, right?
Yes.
And now, we've seen like, hey, he is a shot maker. And I think that I hate this Duke team. Like, I hate the construct of it. It feels so much like a bunch of pieces that are on the floor that just don't fit together. Like, I don't love their guard play. I don't think they get each other involved the right way. And it's early. Maybe they right that ship, but it feels like everybody wants to hunt their own shots. And I think that's why Lively has struggled, because he's a guy that isn't going to be able to create for himself. And now in college, he's not taking those threes that maybe you saw him take every once in a while in high school. So he's really just a garbage guy. Maybe he gets a pick and roll opportunity every once in a while. But, for the guards, like, I feel like Dariq is a guy who is going to need a setup man way more than maybe people wanted to give credit for in the preseason. He's a guy that I think is going to be, you could run him off screens and he gets out. Like, maybe he plays almost like an AJ Griffin role a little bit. And instead of being the guy who forces these tough shots, if he could eliminate that early on and just show like, all right, I could just be a nasty off-ball player, maybe that'll help. But when you play with guards that dominate the ball, you get that ball and you're like, all right, I better get my shot up now. I might not get this ball back.
Yes.
So I don't want to panic with some of the Duke guys, because I think that the fit of the team really stinks, and they don't play the way an NBA offense will use them. And so in that regard, I don't want to panic with some of these guys. And maybe that's why with Filipowski, almost it feels like he's been so much of a smoother fit, because he's a guy that you knew was a complementary piece, but was going to be able to score in a bunch of different ways without the ball. And he's figured out how to do that to when he does get it. All right, he can create a little, but he's also able to pick and pop, and he can run off screens a little bit, and he could attack closeouts and just kind of keep things a little bit more simpler than a guy like Dariq was used to. Dariq was used to the complicated stuff. And sometimes if you're used to the complicated, it's hard to just play less complicated and take things out of your game, because you've been so used to the hard. And that's the weird thing with Dariq, right? Because he grew up playing with Cade and Scotty, and so part of me thinks he should be used to that as well. But he's just been confounding for me, because I think the situation stinks. He's coming back from injury. He's out of shape, but also some of the things I was concerned about have reared their ugly heads. So he's like you. I haven't dropped him too far, and Dereck Lively, I haven't really dropped much at all, because he was already that low on my board initially. So, but I do think people have, ultimately when we do the next draft rankings, he is going to be overall on most other boards drop. But yeah, I'm not super concerned about any of these guys yet. But I, like you said, as we start moving through the season and you start getting into conference play, there's potential to be a nightmare season for Duke this year that I think people weren't expecting. And it might just be because, we overshot our loads on some of these guys with the rankings preseason.
Coming into this year, the Duke team seemed like it was either two ways. It was either going to be just absolute anarchy with how much like talent they had in a good way, or it was going to be really, really strange of a fit. And it looks like we're trending towards the strange fit, because you talked about a lot of good stuff there. I kind of want to go one by one. Dariq is crazy because you look at him, he's played 7 games. He hasn't played more than 17 minutes in one game. So you're clearly seeing like they're trying to build it up. They're trying to get the trust back. But, he's his best production was he played 17 minutes, went 2 for 9. He had 7 points. He's had some games recently where a little bit more efficient. His last game against Boston College, he had 17 minutes, had 6, 3, and 2 on 3 of 5 shooting. So those are the weird games where maybe the confidence starts clicking and all of a sudden you could go on a nice little stretch. But it's just it really has been a weird fit, and I'm right there with you. That roster just seems so ugly because it seems like it needs another guy to just completely take over. And early on in the year, I was like, man, this team really needs Dariq. And then Dariq came back, and I was like, oh boy, if he's not ready to dominate, like where are we going with this? And Proctor's looked better, but I'm still more on your island about Proctor. I'm a little bit slow. Metcalf keeps talking about his defense, and I'm like, okay, but what else? And then Lively, I've been low too. I haven't loved what I've seen. I'll leave it that way. But he's only averaging 17 minutes too. So,
and Lively's weird because sometimes I think he has stretches where I'm like, oh yeah, like yes. I like what he showed there defensively. He's playing drop, he's playing cat and mouse, he's getting back, he's recovering, he's switched out. He's coming over. He's blocking shots. He's doing all the things he's supposed to do. And I almost feel like there might be almost like an overcorrection on him where people were like, all right, like, I got to drop him down because he's not this guy I lived up for. Yes. And in my head, I was like, what are the chances he has the season Mark Williams had last year, right? Like probably pretty low. Mark Williams, what pick did he go to the Hornets? Was it 15?
13, 14, 15,
15, in that range. Like, yeah. Borderline lottery guy. What are the chances Lively does the same things when he's not really any more of an offensive threat than any of those guys, right? Like, so having him drop to where he is, I almost feel like, maybe a team can kind of get him in that same kind of range and get really great value. But if he drops below that, it's almost like this guy could be a really fun defensive prospect. And when you put him with an NBA playmaker with NBA space, maybe a lot of these opportunities, these cleanup opportunities and lob opportunities really open up for him. But yeah, just Duke is just a weird team. They're going to confound me, I think, through the process. And Proctor, I mean, look, I've been watching a lot of Filipowski tape. And he just misses some reads on like pick and pops and driving kicks to take these tough setbacks. And I think he's got that in his bag. He's obviously had a couple of highlight ones, but I'm like, I thought his thing was playmaking coming into the year, right? Like that's kind of what he was billed at. And maybe one of the, because the Australian point guard factory. And I've been seeing a lot less of the point guard stuff that I want to see. And now he reclassified, he's 17, right? Or maybe he just turned 8. I don't know. He's on the younger side. Yes. So, it's not unexpected that he hasn't figured out how to be a complete point guard yet. And I definitely think we have to remember that about him. But I don't think he's the guy who's going to run the engine the way, they need like a Chris Duhon, somebody who not a high level NBA guard, but somebody who's just be like, all right, let's get these guys looks in their spots. And it just feels like a bunch of guys who don't know how to do that with each other yet.
And for me saying I just want to point out, like for everyone listening, for me saying I was low on Lively, I'm right there with you. There's some flashes in the game where I'm like, okay, big fella, here we go. Like you got me on the edge of my seat, but then it's just kind of fades. And I'm like, okay, do you need more sample size? Do you need more minutes? Do you need, it's just one of those, like, this big class, I think, and I don't consider Victor big. I consider him an alien. He's on a different level. But this big class, I feel like we're all, as evaluators, and we're watching this class, and we're like, okay, who's going to be the guy that takes advantage of this? Because there's a lot of questions about the big class when it comes to Lively, Khalil Ware, and
Daron Holmes.
Daron Holmes.
Let me ask you.
JD, and then that's where Filipowski comes in. Go ahead. But I wanted to talk about Filipowski.
No, you're right. Do you think that we're going to be just trying to convince ourselves that there has to be a big in the class? There just might not be.
I think we're going to try to convince ourselves 100%. And I'm at the point where I think everyone trying to convince themselves is because every NBA teams are always going to look for it. But I think this class right now, it's like, why? Like, why would any team right now take Lively in the lottery? And I'm not trying to downplay the kid. It's just he hasn't shown that he's a lottery pick with this class, because we just talked about how good the lottery looks. If you took Lively in the top 10, you're either saying it's a horrendous fit for him at Duke this year. We've seen him, and this could happen, and they could say, hey, we've seen him since high school. We know the type of upside he has. We would be very happy to get him at 10. That's fine. But I'm saying from the tape I've seen so far, 8 games into the year, which is, ridiculous to just all of a sudden make all these statements. But I'm saying you can't say right now that like, oh, I would take Lively in this class top 10. Like I would.
No. I wouldn't have taken Lively
on GG Jackson. Would you be taking GG over him? See,
I have GG ranked ahead. I do have GG ranked ahead of Lively.
Yes.
So I would.
Okay.
But I still think think GG. A lot of people love them some GG Jackson, and I'm not 100% there on GG. I think he's shown probably more than I expected. I was a little cooler on GG coming into the year, and he's exceeded my expectations. Again, another guy who has reclassified, right? With GG coming into the year, I was like, every time I watched a full game, like his highlights were insane. Yes. I think he's going to have one of the best highlight tapes still in college. But when I watched him coming into the year, I was like, I was like, I just need you to try in any other aspect of the game besides you scoring. And it was like hard to watch. I was like, oh, this effort level makes me want to saw my arm off. I think that stuff is kind of taking care of itself in college, and I'm not concerned about that. I think he does try, but he loves taking tough jumpers. He loves it so much. Yes. And he doesn't like passing much. And not to say even that maybe he's like a selfish guy who's hunting his shot. I just don't think he has that kind of feel to be a natural passer. And I think that's really, really hard to develop. So he's kind of like this guy he fits the modern NBA as a guy who's, 6'10" with ball handling and outside shooting ability. But he also doesn't have like that requisite feel to kind of do anything else on the court other than score. So there's certainly like a role for him, and his physical tools are great. I just, due to the lack of passing and maybe the lack of like getting downhill and trying to get to the rim and leveraging the shooting, they're just things I need to see from him. But he's so young that like you have to take into account he's a year behind developmentally than everybody else, and I don't know, maybe he starts getting to the basket more and drawing free throws, and that's a total possibility. So he's confusing to me too. I need more time. I need to see him in conference play. I want to see him just develop. Say be patient. Again, not a finished product, but I'm definitely not ready to throw my hat and take him in the top 10, even though he has some tantalizing stuff. He's a confounding guy, is what I'll say.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to end it with one more thing, and I'm going to call this Help Me, Help You. Little fun segment right there. Shout out Jerry Maguire. I am starting to really like Kyle Filipowski as a prospect, but I'm also struggling. Now, you're writing about him soon at NoCeilingsNBA.com. Absolutely free. There's my plug at the end. Should have done that a lot earlier, but it's okay. I'm learning. It's been rusty. I need you to talk to me about Mr. Filipowski, because I was very, very cold on him in the beginning of the year, and it was because I thought this was a potentially dominant high school player that I thought was going to be good in college, but I didn't know if I saw all of it translating to the NBA level. And I've liked what I've seen. I like how he plays his butt off. I like how he's tough. I like how he battles. I feel like I've seen some footwork instances that I'm like, okay, I wasn't expecting that, even if it's almost like you'd rather it maybe be tuned up a little bit, like faster. But he also has some plays off the dribble where I'm like, okay, where's this big fella? The shot looks really smooth from outside. I'm intrigued. My problem is, where are we at with him as a potential next level player? Is this, you're saying, hey, he's going to be our 5? Are you thinking this is a guy you play next to your 5 that just could give you a little bit of an advantage? Is he a weapon off the bench? Like, where are you at with Filipowski? Hit me with it. Help me help you.
All right. So Filipowski came in on the Draft Act rankings preseason at 37, right? Yes. So I think everybody was a little bit weary of Filipowski. You know, you're like, all right, 7-foot shooter, but kind of what else does he do? Is he going to be able to defend? And I think, little teaser for my piece, where I've taken it and what I've chosen a lot to focus my writing on throughout this process is, let's look at these guys through an NBA context. And what better way than to find guys who maybe share some similarities in the NBA and see if I could find patterns and movements and just ways that they could be used at an NBA level that will allow them to actually stick and hang. And I think, we talked about it. I think that the skill level of these prospects matters more and more every year. Filipowski, I think I haven't redone my, we have to put our rankings in for our new big board that'll be dropping soon. I haven't done that fully yet, but I'm going to say that Filipowski's probably going to be somewhere around my lottery.
Okay.
And which is a far cry from where he started.
Right.
I've been watching a lot of Lauri Markkanen in Utah. Now,
bless your heart.
Lauri's, and I'm a longtime Lauri Markkanen fan. He was drafted by the Bulls, and he looked awesome in Fred Hoiberg's offense. Hoiberg had a lot of issues as a coach, but he didn't have the horses to run the offense he wanted to run ever. But Lauri looked awesome there. He was used in so many creative off-ball sets, pick and pop, coming off handoffs, being the guy who was running the handoffs, allowing him to drive in kicks where he can catch, attack closeouts. Jim Boylan came in, one of the worst coaches in NBA history, absolutely a travesty, destroyed everyone's confidence, is one of the reasons the Bulls, Derrick Rose's knee injury and Jim Boylan, like the two most catastrophic things that have happened to the Chicago Bulls franchise since Jordan retired. He goes to Cleveland, and you start going, oh, jumbo ball, these teams are playing bigger. NBA offenses are getting wider, more spaced out. If you're skilled and you could do some things offensively, maybe you can get creative and play guys in certain ways. And then he goes to Utah. They're playing this beautiful, 5-out offense where there are multiple ball handlers and guys have freedom and just so much spacing on the floor. And now Markkanen has his confidence back and he's broke out. Now, I'm not saying that Filipowski is necessarily the same level of prospect as Lauri Markkanen. I think Lauri is a slightly more flexible mover. But I think that I underrated how good of a mover Filipowski actually was. And I've seen a lot of similarities with Lauri Markkanen in the way they move, the way they finish. I think that Filipowski isn't shooting at the level he's capable of. That dude's shot is really freaking pure right now. And I think part of the Duke problem is, they don't have a guy who could really make use of Kyle Filipowski like Mike Conley has been able to run the Jazz, like a veteran like that who's going to be able to get the ball to guys where they need them. Right? Filipowski's not playing with guys who have the same feel as a guy like Kelly Olynyk in the front court. They're not playing with the same level of spacing. But Filipowski's done some stuff offensively in multiple actions. I mean, I've seen him come off and hit threes coming off a handoff as the wing. I've seen him take guys off the bounce. I've seen him do some little combo moves, knocking down off the bounce threes or, a one dribble pull up behind the back. He's a really creative offensive scorer. And then you can give him the ball down low when he gets a switch on a mismatch with the smaller guy on him. He's got really beautiful footwork down low, and he could also just go straight up and over. Now, one of the big differences between Markkanen and Filipowski, I think Lauri has always had an underrated mean streak. Like, if that dude has a head of steam, he is going to put you on a poster. He's probably got one of the best poster reels on YouTube if somebody put that together. And I mean that with all my heart. Like, yeah. He's a nasty big dude. I don't think Filipowski can attack the rim and put it down on somebody like that. But I don't fully remember if Lauri was doing that at Arizona either. And maybe the added space the NBA has provided has allowed him to, to the runway to actually go and throw it and yam it down on people. But I do think that Filipowski the more I look at it, he might not be for every team. But there are certain teams that want to run these creative offenses that I do think he's going to be able to be a really fun weapon for certain teams. And if you have a team with some downhill threats, like, it's going to be really hard to leave him open. He's going to be able to play pick and pop with your guy. He's going to be able to slip it, and he cuts off ball. He just has a lot of interesting tools. And I just think even kinesthetically, he looks like Markkanen. Now, there's some Kevin Love in his game too. And we're going to do the white on white comparisons because they're the best ones for Filipowski. But there's also, like, is there an outcome where he's Frank Kaminsky? I don't know. I think that he's more talented than Kaminsky, right? But maybe somewhere in between the Kaminsky, the Markkanen. I'm not saying he's going to be Lauri, but that's probably what his high-end outcome looks like. Maybe not this Utah version that's an all-star, but probably like the Cleveland, the later Chicago years where he's just a cog in your offense and you're able to, do some stuff with him as a scorer and a spacer at 7 feet. I think he's going to bring some versatility to an NBA offense. So I've become higher on him by watching more of how the NBA is played and how, Lauri played and Kevin Love has played. And the fact that Kevin Love and Lauri Markkanen were able to play together. The fact that Olynyk and Markkanen were able to play together. Because I think you could say he's got some Olynyk to his game too, right? Like, I think that when you have these skilled bigs, they're really tricky when you play them off of each other. And I think that there are a lot of skilled players in the NBA that are going to accentuate Filipowski's game when he gets to that level. Now, the defense, obviously, people are going to have question marks about that. Teams are going to have question marks about it. And that's probably why he's not a top 10 pick necessarily, because, you get him on an island with Trae Young or something like that. Like, it might not end well. But I do think he's shown. I thought he defended Jalen Wilson really well in the Kansas game. I think that some of these wings, I think he's a little bit more fluid than he's going to look, because sometimes he looks a little tight, but it's a weird thing because as tight as he looks, sometimes you're like, wow, that was a really, really fluid thing. So that's where I'm at with Filipowski. I'll give, actual examples in my piece for him that's going up tomorrow, where you'll actually be able to watch and say, okay, I get it. 7-foot white shooter, easy to go to Lauri Markkanen. But when you actually are breaking the side by sides and going, this is how Lauri got this, got to the bucket or got a score, 2 points, 3 points out of this action. Okay, this is that same action. When you can mirror it, I think it'll provide kind of a clearer picture of how he could be used in the NBA versus this weird Duke offense.
Corey, go ahead and plug away. This was a real fun one, and let the people know where they can find you. Also, let the people know where to read your upcoming piece.
All right, you can find the whole crew at NoCeilingsNBA.com, obviously. You can find me at Corey Tulaba. On the Draft Deck, Albert and I later this week on this podcast feed will be covering Grady Dick. And, just hit me up on TikTok. You could find the crew there at No Ceilings NBA on TikTok. We all have our own personal TikToks. I think Maxwell's been doing a good job. The rest of the crew, I think, you already got the content. Let's start posting. I'm at NBA Draft Dude there. We got a lot of fun stuff planned for the rest of this year, man. So I'm excited to bust out this cycle because I think big things ahead for the 2023 class.
Thank you, Corey, for coming on. Everyone, thanks for listening. Hope you stayed, hope you didn't get insane while listening to me as a host. I'm sure I'll be back on the cycle for home and away in the near future. We'll get some more guests up on here. But Corey, thanks for joining me. For everybody else, make sure you subscribe to the No Ceilings podcast feed and head on over to the site, NoCeilingsNBA.com. It's absolutely free. You get coverage all year round. We've heard from so many fans about how much it's helped them, how much they've learned, how much they like us. Just kidding. But thank you guys again. My name's Tyler Rucker for Corey Tulaba and the No Ceilings crew. We will see you guys next time. Have a good one.